All right, I'm going to start with something that's really been sitting heavy with me. Every week, there's another headline. AI is going to wipe out entry-level jobs. Automation is coming for your workforce, and HR as we know it, well, it's finished. But I keep thinking that's not what I'm hearing whenever I'm talking to practitioners who are actually in the room doing the work. And that's the biggest reason why I wanted to bring on Kyle Forrest.
88% of respondents kind of said it's really important for organizations to be able to orchestrate how humans and technology work together. But only 7% said that they thought their companies were making good progress.
Kyle is a fellow data guy, so in this episode, we're going to dig into all of the data behind the biggest workforce changes that are happening right now, including AI, automation, demographic shifts, and the future of entry-level work. And you know what? We land on something that I feel pretty strongly about. HR leaders cannot wait for someone else to design the future of the HR function. That's more of a slow exit than it is a strategy. So with that, let's dig in. Welcome back to the Human Capitalist Podcast. I am your host, Trent Cotton, and I am joined by a fellow futurist today, and we're going to be digging into, guess what, data. Kyle, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Trent. Really excited to be here.
Yeah, I've been stalking your content for a hot minute, and then I think you posted something not too long ago. I was like, all right, I've got to have you on because I love your data approach. I love how you're kind of pushing the envelope. But for the audience, can you just kind of explain your role at Deloitte, because it's really fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. So I lead our team focused on the future of HR, very specifically. And what that means is I spend a lot of time with CHROs, HR leaders across industries and sectors, trying to understand what's happening in the world of work at large, how those trends are impacting enterprises, and what does that mean for the role of HR, both in terms of shifts that might have to happen within the function, and what the function is doing to support the broader enterprise to navigate through those shifts, right? And certainly over the last 3.5 years, AI and automation has been maybe the trend that has taken up a lot of oxygen. But I think there are demographic shifts, macroeconomic, geopolitical, all sorts of things happening in the world of work that organizations have to try to anticipate or react and respond to. And HR has a role in helping navigate all of them.
Completely agree. And it's almost like you just wrote the foreword for the book that I'm working on. So we'll talk about that after the podcast issue. But what are the three biggest trends that you're seeing whenever it comes to the workforce?
Yeah. So because I certainly shared that AI and automation has taken up a lot of oxygen, I'll start with one there, right? Which is every organization is trying to understand what work AI is actually impacting or changing, right? And thus, what are the new types of work and roles that people will have within organizations, right? And there's a lot to unpack there, certainly. So we'll get there, but I'll say that that's one, right? Second is on the demographic front, right? Organizations for a long time have dealt with skills shortages, talent shortages, things along those lines. Like that in and of itself is not a new topic. But I don't think people are really realizing in the next 5, 10, 15 years the demographic impact we're going to face, right? Due to fewer humans in the prime working age range, right? And we're already seeing that in some countries, and I've got some data that we'll unpack there as well. And then I think the third is a little bit of kind of tied to those two, but continued working style preferences from different generations, right? Deloitte, recently published our latest Gen Z and Millennial survey that's got some insights into it. But as with every generation, there are certain things that they focus on, that they expect from employers. The employer-employee contract is evolving. So there's certainly a lot, I think, from those expectations from the workforce that's another thing to dig into.
I love it. So let's talk about the generational aspect of it, because that's pretty interesting. In my day job, look at workforce data all day long, especially the media, and I'm sure you get reached out to a lot by media. They love that generational slice. What are some of the trends, like if I'm sitting in a practitioner seat, what are some of the trends that I need to be planning for?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple things. And this is where I'm probably going to tie a little bit of the generational and demographic data together, right?
Okay.
So first of all, if you're a U.S. headquartered company or you have a large U.S. workforce, by 2030, every member of the baby boomer population, baby boomer cohort, is going to have hit 65 plus, right? So be retirement eligible. And so they're not all going to stay in the workforce. And if they do, it's not going to all be in full-time jobs, right? So I think we're going to have to see organizations respond with new types of working arrangements, right? Beyond the traditional, you're full-time, you're part-time, or do you move and become contingent, right? And I think that pairs in with even like how are, experienced workers, long tenured workers who've been in the workforce a long time, having their own generational approach to the topic of AI, right? Their approach on learning it, how do they think it impacts their expertise, their knowledge, their hard-earned wisdom over the course of their careers, right? And how do the two of those things play out? On the other end of the spectrum, right, there are fewer entry level workers coming in, right? In May of 2025 in the US was the largest high school graduating class we've ever had. I learned a week or so ago, apparently there are more seniors in high school right now than kindergartners, right? Which means we
Wow.
will, again, and that's just a birth rate math equation, right? Relative to fewer people, moving through our education systems, those fewer people going to college and then entering the workforce. And also, in the last few years, we've had many high schoolers and college students saying, should I pursue a knowledge worker type of role, or should I be going into a skilled trade, right? And we certainly need more people in skilled trades, right? But then that gets into, well, as AI it looks at and packs certain tasks, Gen Z folks are like, well, how do I actually gain some of the expertise and knowledge in functional domain areas combined with my maybe willingness to use tools differently to accelerate my ability to make an impact on the workforce, right? So you've got pressures in kind of different angles. And I think all of this, ties to Gen Z cohort broadly, millennials as well. This was in our Gen Z millennial survey report. People want to do impactful work. They want to do work that ties to a purpose, ties to meaning. They want to have the opportunity to accelerate their career growth, right? And we've got some data and numbers that kind of back all that up. But like those are three different cohorts of things that it all intertwines with some of the other trends that that's why you can't look at them in isolation.
No, that's a great point, and I think that everyone tries to, especially on the clickbait side. They separate all of them. Again, in some of the data that I look at during the day, one of the things that has fascinated me about Gen Z is this change over the last year. So last year, ISIMS, we asked them who's responsible for training and developing you in the age of AI, and the top two answers were college and universities and the employer. Not a surprise. This year we asked, and a third of them actually said that they were taking it upon themselves. They're looking in the market, they're seeing what skills are being required. They're trying to put a little bit of a forecast on it, and they're owning their own career development, which, since I've been in the workforce, that's the first generation that I have seen that's been one, perceptive enough, and two, take ownership, because everybody else is like, well, you should train me, you should do this. Gen Z's like, screw that, I'm taking it on my own, which I think says a lot about that generation. I think I'd shared with you before we hopped on, my daughter's 23, and she graduated in May with her bachelor's in civil engineering. And prior to graduation, being the dad, I was like, do you have a job? Have you done this? And she goes, Dad, I'm looking at the market, and I think I need to sit it out for 2 years. And I said, sit it, like, help me understand what you mean by sit it out. And so she was, looking at going and getting her master's. She says, Dad, there's two things that are going on. One, the job market. Two, I know that once I get in the market, me going back and getting my master's is not going, it's probably not going to happen. And I don't know, like when you graduated, I wasn't looking at, I was looking for a job, but I wasn't looking at what the trends were in the market to determine, should I just go and finish and get my MBA? So
Right.
I mean, that's huge for that generation.
Yeah. Well, I think there's probably a couple things that are have created the environment for what you just described. One, just this continued significant trend of hey, I can find an answer of how to do a thing on YouTube or TikTok or other, like just the wealth of available content to learn from if you're motivated enough to go find it, or LinkedIn Learning, right? Like there's a wealth of content that probably other generations didn't have access to in quite the same way, right? And then I think secondarily, people who are in college are probably looking around and they're seeing companies start to talk about, hey, don't bring a resume. We want your portfolio of things you have done, right?
Mhm.
Show us how you've used AI to build a thing if you're going to apply to this marketing role, or et cetera, right? So then people are like, okay, well, I need to take the time to learn to do things and do the things, whether that's in the classroom environment or on the side while I'm in a university or other. So I have things I can show, right, to a prospective employer. And then I think the third thing, a little bit that's interesting. So for the last several years, we've had many organizations talk about, hey, I should be able to hire for skills. I don't necessarily need a degree to decide, is the candidate the right person to come in. Well, now, as organizations say that there's this like overwhelming, almost like overly polished resumes, maybe they're almost too generic in look and feel because of some of the AI ability to help, right, up level candidates with their resumes. Some organizations are actually now falling back on the degree as like some sort of proxy to understand the candidate as a, should they have a certain set of skills or something, right? So in that sense, I very much understand your daughter's rationale to say, well, if there's pressure on certain entry level roles and a master's degree will help me show up with yet another credential that maybe gets me another, rung up into an organization, like, why not? Right. So, with the mix of things going on in the market, certainly can understand how that would go.
And it's interesting, the kind of the perception of AI throughout each of the different demographics. You would think newer generation that they're just hell bent, headlong, everything AI, but the data that I've seen, they're actually more skeptical. Gen X is actually the one that's like, use it, verify that it's right. But I mean, they're a little bit more of an early adopter than you would see with Gen Z. How is that going to affect? Because they're becoming the larger section of the workforce. How's that going to affect every organization's plan to automate an AI? I mean, that's a big hurdle to jump.
Yeah. So there's, I think, a couple of things that I'll share on that one. So first of all, I think most organizations have not actually been explicit to their candidates or their workforce on, why are we doing this? Why are we investing in AI? Right. And in Deloitte's 2025 Human Capital Trends Report, we actually had a chapter all around the employee value proposition in kind of the age of AI. And the call to action for organizations was, you should be very explicit to your candidates in your workforce on, what's your approach to AI? What do you expect to get out of it? And what does this mean for people pursuing a career at your company, right? How are you going to
Right.
help them learn, grow, evolve, change their career, right? And the view was that could be a differentiator, right? Because right now, what happens for many workers is they read a headline, and unfortunately, there's any number of organizations who announce a workforce reduction and tie it to AI in one form or fashion, even though there's a number of studies that are kind of debunking and saying most workforce restructurings that are announced as AI related are pulling other, maybe traditional restructuring levers, right? But workers see the headline and then they see an AI initiative internally, and then there's no clear, well, what does it mean for me? Right. And I think that is a tremendous opportunity, which I think now is the second thing that I would share as the rise of the word trust in organizations and in the market, right? I see many organizations talking about AI only moves at the speed of trust or the speed of the organization. And Deloitte has a wealth of data tied to workforce trust and AI as well, that really gets around when there is not like transparency, meaning simple, easy to understand language around what this AI initiative is about. And then there's not, reliability, like following through and doing what you said you're going to do. Like, hey, we're going to reskill folks. Well, where is it? Right? We're going to
Right.
redeploy folks. Well, who are you redeploying and where? Right? So there's some very specific actions that can be taken to build workforce trust, and if you're not doing that, then you're missing out on the opportunity to get people right to engage into the process. And so that's where I think, why, Gen Z or others might get skeptical or resistant or other. They're waiting for that compelling narrative that builds trust with them to like get in the boat and on the journey.
Yeah, and I love that you called out this whole AI replacement thing. I dropped a video not too long ago. I saw an article, three different articles, one from Dario over at Anthropic, Sam Altman, and then something that was going on in Meta. And I just said, we've had three walkbacks by three CEOs over the last 3 weeks around this whole narrative of AI replacing jobs. And I think it was Sam Altman that was like, hey, yeah, we were really wrong about that. And then Dario with Anthropics, and I think the quote that he said was something along the lines, you should really listen to economists. And I'm like, yeah, duh. But it's been such a hot topic, and I agree with you. It's not AI, because I've yet to see data. Maybe you have. I've yet to see a company that said we laid off 4,000 people because we have 1,000 agents that we created that was able to do their work more efficiently. I've yet to see it. I think all they're doing is they're restructuring the human or the capital that used to be invested in humans into the AI infrastructure. So I'm glad you called that out, and I'll drop a link to that other video in the
Yeah,
description.
well, in Trent, so one, I have not seen an example like you just called out where a company has like credibly with data proven, we're doing this because of this, right?
Right, right.
And there's two things, from a Deloitte, data point perspective over the last several months that I think kind of illustrate some of what we've been seeing in the market, right? First, and this is some data from actually last, summer 25 and into fall of 25, where we actually looked at what were clients spending their money on with us as a consultancy. And in this window of time that we looked, if it was an AI initiative, about 93% was tied to just like the technology, and only about 7% to like people related things, right? Like
And there's the
redesigning work
problem.
or roles or change, right? And it's like,
Yeah.
okay, well, and that was pretty emblematic of, I think, what you were seeing in 23, 24, 25 was just like roll out the tools, right? And then the narrative in the market definitely started changing over the course of 2025, which is like there's these tremendous set of people things you need to focus on, right? So that was one data point. Second data point, so this came in our 2026 human capital trends, from that we published in early March of this year, which was like 88% of our respondents. There were 9,000 respondents, 70 different countries, and we split the data between leaders and workers. So pretty robust data set. But 88% of respondents kind of said it's really important for organizations to be able to like orchestrate how humans and technology work together.
Hmm.
But only 7% said that they thought their companies were making good progress. And that's so an 81 point gap. It was actually our biggest gap
Wow.
between like importance and doing something well about it, in the report at large. And so I think that's part of the challenge, right? Organizations who have rolled out the tools, and I know there's other. I think OrgView had a survey that was like 55 of companies that had done a layoff attributed to AI regretted it, right? Because what
Hmm.
has happened in many instances, right, the work didn't go away, it moved, right? And so without truly understanding the end to end workflow, the end-to-end system of like, if I'm applying AI here and work's moving over here, like, did I really just create capacity or did I just move it? Right. So there's a lot, I think, that's happening in the market relative to like the redesign of work and roles and all that stuff that still has to be solved before we begin to see team-wide, function-wide, organizational-wide kind of productivity gains and capacity release.
And I want to add something to it, that when you're replacing the work with AI, what no one's reporting on is, and I've seen a couple of different stats, but the amount of extra work that it takes for those that are left to verify the work of AI, because it's still learning, it's still being trained. So they're replacing trained staff with precedental knowledge with a technology that could scale, but you do need that ramp up time to give it the precedental knowledge, to give it the training and the learning. And they're skipping that step and then being surprised whenever you have extreme burnout with the people that are left over.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, and so this is where, again, if I take the broad demographic trend of, we will get to a point where there will be fewer people in the workforce, right? Now and that's coming 5, 10, odd years, right? We do need to invest in AI tools to augment humans. Absolutely, right? But I think if the short-term thinking is just the capacity release is an efficiency gain, right? That does not set up an organization well for a longer-term future where there are fewer humans, right, in the workforce, right? So being able to tell, and this goes back to the kind of trend I mentioned from our 2025 report around a really compelling employee value proposition in what an AI-powered or AI-forward or AI-native organization looks like. Arguably, there's a future where like organizations who have more humans are going to be the ones that are winning, because everyone's going to have the same AI models. The access to the tool set's not going to be the problem, right? It's going to be, how have you invested in your people, right? Are you scaling your kind of human edge? And then like the proprietary data that you have that differentiates your kind of AI and technology stack from someone else's, right? So those are things that people need to think about relative to the investments that they're making from both the technology and the people side, over the next few years.
So do you think, because the World Economic Forum has these stats out about how many jobs are going to be affected by AI, replaced, made obsolete, but then there's 92 million, I think was the last number I saw, of new jobs that are being added. But if I'm listening to you going, we're going to have part of the workforce exit and we don't have enough coming in, are you kind of saying that some of that concern, whenever you look at the numbers, that jarring kind of pit in your stomach, that some of that will actually kind of take care of itself with just the limited amount of workforce?
Yeah, right. So some of the World Economic Forum data, I think in the last few years, numbers have varied to the extent of like, hey,
Every time I look at it,
92
it
million
changes.
jobs being impacted, but 130 million new jobs and roles, and various things, right? So that is data that's like available number of jobs and roles, right? Which is like a thing, and then there's available people to fill said jobs and roles, which is another thing, right? And it's one of those, arguably there are plenty of people in the world to fill probably every job anyone could request today. The challenge often it becomes is the supply, right? Do the people live where the demand is? If the demand requires an in-person, to fill it, and then is it a skill set thing, right? And I know that's always been one of the challenges, especially the skilled labor shortages. I think within the last year, a semiconductor organization that I work with was like, our challenge in building data centers is not people who know how to build data centers, it's electricians, right?
Wow.
Like it's different places where the skills shortage exists relative to filling things. But then, in answer to your question directly, yes, right? Like over the next 10, 15, 20 years, we will see shrinkage in the workforce purely from a demographic perspective, right? Like, here's, a few data points, right? Like Japan's population today is the same as it was in 1989, right? So it has been declining. I think both Japan and South Korea over the next couple of decades are expected to decline by up to 25%. China's population has shrunk 4 years in a row. I think a few years ago, the US was supposed to hit our plateau in terms of population size in the late 2030s, and that number has pulled forward into the early 2030s, right? There are countries in Western Europe, Greece, Spain, others who are dealing with aging populations, right? So these aren't new per se, but they are becoming more pressing, right? And that will just, it will have implications for how workforces, how organizations think about talent pools, talent pipelines, flexible work models, right? Do you need as an organization to be much more intentional with like on demand expertise in specific domain areas, right? For people who, would technically be retirees, right? Or do you need to be very intentional over the next few years with your team design, team composition, and say, I must have on every team a mix of early career and senior people to force some of the knowledge transfer, right? So it's not that there aren't tactics that organizations can take to navigate through this, but it requires some intentionality with an approach to it, right? You can't just leave it up to blind chance and hope it's going to work out in a few years.
And I think that kind of leads me into the next question, which is what are some of the trends that you're seeing how AI is going to affect HR's role?
Yeah. So I'll start with like a year ago, we published at Deloitte a point of view that we called HR Reimagined. And that was based on where we were seeing the market going in 23 and 24, early 25. Conversations with CHROs, HR leaders, also with CIOs, with third-party technology firms, with researchers and analysts, right? And we started with this simple premise of we know AI is going to impact work. And we kind of bucketed it into three categories of saying how is the work of today going to change to tomorrow? And if the work of today is done 100% by a human, and tomorrow they're still going to have a ton of human-to-human interaction, right? Sales executive talking to customers, HR business partner talking to leaders and managers, right? Then we would call the role probably AI assisted, right? It will use the person in the role will use AI to do facets of the work different, better, faster, but there's still going to be a lot of human-to-human interaction. Then we had an AI augmented and an AI powered. And the AI powered was basically the other end of the spectrum, where if the work of today is done mostly by a human, tomorrow it might mostly be done by AI and automation capabilities. And so the work of the human will change, right? And a lot of organizations are investing in the operations space, right? Whether it's HR operations, customer service operations, you name it there, right? To say, do we get to a point where through agents or enhanced, HR assistance, this new digital front door concept, can humans stop, answering inquiries or doing transactions, right? A worker, a manager can like engage in Teams and Slack, in a collaboration tool, engage with the agent, like find answers, get things done, right, on behalf. So then the role of an HR operations person would change from like doing the transaction work or the inquiries work to managing the team of agents, right? Or managing the knowledge and content and data used to train the agents, right? Or taking on new AI capabilities as they roll out over time and like continuing to redesign workflows and things along that front, right? So we use that as our premise to say, okay, if we use this framework and then we apply it to the HR function, like what does that mean, right? And there's really kind of three things that we saw maybe as like a go forward perspective, right? One is is there convergence in some of the business partner and CUE type of roles relative to how a human shows up with their end customers, with their business stakeholders, right? So today, a business partner might meet with a leader, and the leader says, okay, I've got this business problem. We want to do a new product launch or M&A or other. And the business partner might, do a little bit in the room, but then they might have to go back and find 4 or 5 friends. Like I need my talent data, or I need my analytics and run this, or boom, boom, boom. And they bring it back 4 or 5 weeks later and they say, okay, business, here's this. And by the way, our HR and finance data doesn't agree, right? Whereas like in the future, that person might sit in the room and they might have their own AI augmentation that says, okay, I've got access to external labor market data. I've got internal talent data. I'm going to org design scenario model in real time with you now and talk about talent or total rewards or other, implications, right? Well, for the human to do that, they are going to need capabilities that business partners have today and capabilities that COEs have today. And now all of a sudden sit within one person with AI augmentation in the room, right? Well, that has a big implication, right? So if there's where a business partner role potentially goes, CUE roles, you might have people who are in CUE roles today who just go and fill that type of role, right? Or do they start owning more end-to-end journeys, experiences? You'll hear product operating model, treat HR as a product, treat work as a product, and how do you continue to make iterative changes as AI and automation capabilities kind of come out, in another fashion, right? And then in the HR operations space, this gets into one of those like, how does that team evolve to maybe own, the agents, the AI tools, and then there's also a question of where organizations rely on third-party managed services or tap into a broader global business services type of group as organizations make investments into all that along the way. So certainly, I think like any inflection point, the HR function will change, right? That's not new. And every enterprise, every function has changed at inflection points. It just becomes for every individual business, what's the North Star you're going to anchor on? And how are you then going to make some of the technology and people's, investments to get the right capabilities to do the work tied to whatever North Star you're aiming for?
That's a lot to take in. But it's exciting though, because at the end of the day, I mean, I think at some point, I don't know what happened, but HR forgot that the H stood for human. It just focused so much on the processes, and I think it over rotated. So like that future that you're talking about, that to me sounds fun. That would actually get me to go back into the
Yeah.
practitioner role, because I enjoyed the consulting. I enjoyed the strategy and the development aspect of it. It was the processes that made me have to go get Botox. So
Yeah.
what I always like to give like I call it a mic drop moment. So if I'm a practitioner and I'm listening and going, wow, that's a lot of data. What is a mic drop moment for them of what they can start doing today to get ready for the future that you're painting?
I think the mic drop moment is acknowledging if you don't go take ownership of designing or co-creating your future, someone in the C-suite will do it for you, right? Like, and unfortunately, right, that's just acknowledging some of the pressures of especially public companies, right? Depending on your business environment, the industry sector you're in, how are some of those other world trends influencing your sales, your profit margins? What's the Wall Street's view of your stock price, right? There will come a point that the business executive team will say, there's some action we need to take, right? And when that happens, right, you want to have hopefully already been preparing for redesigning your work and role, or actively redesigning your work and role, right? And this is where actually relative to how can executives engage the workforce on redesigning work and roles, I've kind of seen two ends of the spectrum that could be useful for executives to consider now and for individual practitioners to even consider, right? And try to figure out, where is my executive team on this, right? On one end, there are some executive teams who've said, hey, folks, we don't know as we invest in AI, what's going to happen to our workforce. But what we think we're going to do for, let's say, the next period of time is hold headcount flat. Let's figure this out. Let's not hire new roles if we think the role might change significantly, right? Which gets back to your daughter and, people in college trying to look ahead and understand, why would I jump into this role or field if I don't know the potential disruption it's about to go through, right? So you've got some executive teams like, let's just hold headcount flat for now. Let's invest in the tools. Let's redesign work and like go from there, right? And great. Okay, so if a workforce has heard that, they're like, okay, I feel safe to go into the redesign process, right? And then you've got a smaller subset of companies who are actually saying things like, we don't know what's going to happen. We also don't know that we can commit to holding the workforce flat. But what we do know is if you're not going to come join us in redesigning work and roles and using the tools, this isn't the place for you, right? So come help us redesign work and roles, and we can't commit that you'll have a role in a few years, but like the way to a role is to get into the redesign process, right? And then there's the middle ground of people who don't say anything, right? Which then again, it leaves it up to the worker to kind of read between the lines, right? Of where are we going? So that gets back to my mic drop moment for the worker of like, if you know your organization is investing in AI tooling, you need to sort out, like, are you going to get involved in some form or fashion as a proactive measure to continue to build your own skill set, right? And hopefully, right, we're all humans. The human condition is to grow. We're born, we grow, we die, right?
Right.
We never
Yeah.
stop growing until that point, right? Whether that's intellectual growth, physical growth, both, we're constantly growing, right? So just treat it as a growth moment. Treat it as a, like, change happens, that's okay. Growth happens, that's okay, right? Like, however you need to, like, go find a band of friends in your company or a set of coworkers, like, just grow. And the seeds that you plant, right? The seeds that you water, those will bear fruit one way or another.
Love it. I love it. Well, there are several quotable moments that may show up in the book. I think your mic drop moment, I'm going to open one of my chapters with, because that was epic. So if someone just fell in love with the data, really like where you're going, where can they find and connect with you?
Yeah. So the easy LinkedIn, right? Certainly, it's been a journey, and Trent, I know kind of you and I found each other through the combination of LinkedIn and some of that, HR technology, HR event circuit. But I a couple years ago, Gina Cheel kind of gave me the challenge of, like, hey, sometimes it's a little difficult to get some insights from Deloitte. Kyle, like, can you help with that? Right. So I was like, well, one easy way is for me to bring the insights forward. So I can guarantee you will 3 to 5 or more times a week see some sort of insights from me, on an array of topics, on LinkedIn. And then we also, actually at Deloitte, we've got our Insights to Action website, which is where our HR Reimagined and various other points of view live. So there are, pre-recorded webinars and presentations and access to information. And yeah, I mean, happy to engage with folks through either of those channels in any way, because my general mantra right now is, again, we are in it together. We're all trying to co-create, co-design a future where humans are at the center, and we are excited about what that future looks like, right? And so I'm here to help in any way. And I think, Trent, to your point on the H in human resources is for human, right? If we're not all doing it, as humans together, then what are we doing this for anyways?
I totally agree. Totally agree. Well, I will attest to the content that you put out. I love it. I love your perspective, and I use it a lot in my day job to kind of go, okay, well, what does Kyle say about this? Does he have any kind of thing? So you're one of the ones I juxtapose our data against, and I'm very thankful for you and Deloitte and all the wonderful information that you all put out. So make sure that you find and connect with him, and we will see you on the next episode. Thanks for joining, Kyle.
Thanks for having me, Trent.